18 minutes after 7 o'clock. Hello again, and thanks for watching the AM report. So, a cabinet reshuffle is believed to be on the horizon following the ANC's national conference, which took place just last month. Now, with the country facing numerous service delivery challenges such as power and water cuts, citizens expect the president to choose a leadership that will at least try solve these issues meaningfully. So, what should we expect if this cabinet reshuffle does take place, or perhaps I should say when? Let's make sense of all of this for you now. Bring in Professor Themba Maseko, who's with the Wits School of Governance. In fact, he recently penned an opinion piece around this and joins us in our studios. Always great chatting to you, sir. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you
for coming in. So in that opinion piece that I spoke about, you actually outline a criteria of some sort that the president ought to follow if he is to appoint what you call the dream team. But let me just take this moment to hone in on what is currently topical, which is the DA's challenge of the cadre deployment policy in court. Can Ramaphosa really meaningfully appoint this dream team if he doesn't feel that he still needs to appoint people who have some kind of political clout? In other words, if he is not loyal to the principles of the ANC's interpretation of cadre deployment?
Well, I think the important point you make here is the distinction between appointing officials into government departments and people into state-owned enterprises. And I think that the issue of cadre deployment applies more there than in the appointment of cabinet. Because cabinet is basically political appointment, and they often tend to appoint people with very strong political clout, as you say. And there, those are party political appointments. So ANC would appoint ANC ministers, DA will appoint DA ministers. So at cabinet level, the issue is not that relevant. What's important, though, is that the issue of meritocracy needs to apply across the board, whether it's cadre deployment in government departments or government-owned companies, but also it needs to apply now, especially for cabinet appointment, because these are people who are responsible for resolving the many crises that we're experiencing as a country. You're mentioning water, electricity. Our potholes are becoming roads in the country now. You've got potholes that have patches of tar on them. So we have a serious crisis. There's crime, rising levels of crime. There's high unemployment. Too many people are going to bed hungry at night. So we've got to make sure that we are led by people who have the skill, the energy, and the capacity to actually deliver and solve all of those problems. And these are people who need to be ethical, in my view. They need to have very good work ethic. They need to be dedicated. They need to prioritize and not just see these appointments as some kind of celebrity process where they just drive around in flashy cars. But these are people who need to make sure that they've got the energy to solve the problems that our country is facing. It's no longer about just managing political dynamics within the ruling party, but getting the right kind of people within the ruling party who can actually do the job. But the Constitution also gave the President the scope to appoint at least a maximum of 2 people who can be appointed outside of Parliament. So in other words, if he looks at his team, MPs and NEC members, and he finds that there is a skill he does not possess in those structures, he can then look outside of Parliament and party to find the skills and bring them into government.
And therein, I think, lies the conversation, right? Whether or not we've reached a point where the president, in fact, should do that. I take your point about there being an expectation that if the president is from the governing party, then most of the appointments should be from that organization. But we've seen him deviate from that slightly, even with Patricia de Lille in the last cabinet appointment. She's not within the ANC who was appointed. And I wonder whether or not he's got now, dare I say, a responsibility to broaden that.
I think that he needs to demonstrate to the nation that he is aware that we're currently in crisis, and that in constituting his team, he mustn't just look at filling vacancies that exist in executive. He must say, I'm now constituting a team that will address all the problems that are facing our nation, and I'm going to try and find people who will have the skills and the capacity to perform their duties. Yes, primarily, you look at his party, members of the NEC, members of Parliament who are part of his party. He may still have to look at making sure that it strikes a balance between the various factional interests within the party. But in doing so, he must be guided by the principle of saying, I am now constituting a new team that will make it possible for me to resolve all of the many crises that exist. And in my view, he needs to reduce the size of his cabinet because it's too large. I mean, having to manage 37 people, which is ministers and deputy ministers. It's just impossible for one person to monitor and make sure that they perform. Secondly, he needs to get people who are very energetic, people who have the skills and the capacity and the courage to actually take tough decisions that need to be taken to resolve the problem. But I make that point in the argument that in the article that he needs to award the nation with a much younger cabinet that will represent the demographics of the country, because, I mean, the average age in cabinet is around 60, and yet the median age in the country is 27 years old. So he needs to find ways of bringing younger people who will come with innovative ideas and not be, stuck in the past.
And I'm sure the president...
And that's something that I think is got the capacity to do.
Right. It's something the president must have heard in one way or the other, which brings me to my next question about you're mentioning that he can still negotiate, if you like, the factional dynamics while serving the interests of the country. You'll forgive me, I grew up in Sunday school, and I've been told you can't serve two gods. So I'm not sure to what extent he can meaningfully do that if we are to, solve these challenges, which, let's face it, are complex and in some ways have gotten to where they are because at that level there hasn't been real accountability.
You see, part of the difficulty is that the way all political parties elect their leaders is not necessarily based on skills and capabilities. It's largely based on political support, but also, their popularity within the party. So not enough attention is paid to making sure that people are elected based on their competence, their capability, and skills. And that's a party problem. It's not just an ANC problem.
Right.
Most of the political parties don't pay attention to that. But secondly, when that happens, you then have the chance of having a much wider pool to choose from of people with skills and capabilities. And people need to know that, taking these jobs is not just a celebrity appointment. It's a job that you are appointed to perform. It's a tough job. These guys are expected to work very hard, but we need to make sure that we get the right people. By right people, I'm saying we need to make sure that they've got the skills, the competence, the capability, and the willingness to actually put in their hours to make sure that they resolve the problems. And it cannot just be filling the post because you're trying to manage your factionalism or your challenges in the party. You have to do that, but in doing that, make sure that you get the right people who are actually fit for purpose.
Right. I have no doubt those people exist, dare I say, even in the governing party, which may be seen as a controversial statement given how people are feeling. However, I wonder how many of them are willing to take up that job, given the cost that comes with doing the right thing in our country. Ask Sakela Busuku. Ask Babita Diokaran's family. Ask Themba Maseko.
Well, I think that the country has a more than sufficient number of people with the requisite capabilities and skills. And many of the challenges, remember we're talking cabinet here specifically, many of the problems we are experiencing as a nation is that because of the allegations of corruption and all those kinds of things, politics is becoming very unattractive to many professionals. So many skilled South Africans would not be keen to be seen to be participating in politics and getting into government. And it's a weakness in our system, because we need to find professionals who see getting involved in politics as an important part of public service, them participating in some form or another to actually improve the lives of people. So we're not attracting enough professionals into our political space. But having said that, I think that there's a sufficient number of people within the political structures who need to be considered. And I make the point in the article that, when President Ramaphosa made the speech in Parliament and said, and cited the Tumamina song, he was saying, people must raise their hands to be available to serve. I think that those people are there, they're available to serve. The job of the president is to actually cast his net wider and look for these people within the political structure and make sure that they actually get appointed to positions. Now, at this stage, the focus is too much on the most popular people, the people who participated in campaigning and in elections within the party.
And those are the president is rewarding people for helping him get to where he is.
I think that's a problem, and it's not unique to this current president. Just generally, presidents tend to do that, to find political support to be part of his team. He must do that. He cannot stop doing that, but he needs to also make sure that he chooses capable people from those very groups within his party who have participated in the election process. Because at the end of the day, when he elects a team that doesn't make it possible for him to achieve his objectives, people are not pointing fingers at those people he has appointed. They're pointing fingers at him as a president, and that's what he needs to do.
Absolutely.
To say, it's my job to get the best team, give the best team to the country, and I think South Africans deserve better than what they've been getting over the past couple of years.
Strong statement. If the president were to get this dream team assembled, we do know that they can't do it alone, right? There have been a lot of conversations around the need to professionalize the public service to ensure that there is security of tenure, so that those who would thrive as professionals are, willing to come onto a government to take up these jobs and do what needs to be done. How do we get that right? Because that is another conversation we've been having for years.
At least what he has done with his cabinet was to approve a new framework for professionalizing the public service, and I think that's important. But also note that in my article I say some of the cabinet ministers have been in service for so many years, but the people who run departments are actually the senior civil servants. And that's where the biggest problem is, because you're finding that, in fact, the senior civil servants, your director generals, do not stay longer than 3 years in this government. So it basically means that we're actually having limited skills at the level of cabinet, but when you're cascading down, you're finding that, in fact, the people who are supposed to make sure that this cabinet delivers, that is your director generals, your DDGs, your chief directors, those are people who are actually not staying long enough in the system to provide the kind of professional support that cabinet requires to actually deliver its mandate. And I think that's the crux of the problem. So I'm saying start with a good, solid, strong cabinet. Secondly, build a strong professional public service made up of professionals, essentially, because when it comes to professionals, political affiliations should not matter. We must look at merit and make sure that we appoint the right kind of people to run government departments and report to ministers who are equally capable and able to provide leadership to those government departments. And I think if you can do that in these next few years, I think the chances are that we can actually save the country from the kind of disastrous state we're in this current period.
Well, from your lips to the president's ears. Thanks very much indeed for coming in to speak to us. Really do appreciate it. And we'll be waiting with bated breath until that announcement finally comes through, but certainly all indications showing that it should happen quite soon. Professor Themba Maseko with the Wits School of Governance. Once again, sir, thanks very much indeed for coming through.